Okay, Mr. Chair, we're ready to start. Thank you for your patience.
Ready. At this time, I would like to resume the Phoenix AMA Groundwater Users Advisory Council meeting, which started yesterday on Wednesday, June 10th. The date today is June 11th, 2020, and the time is 1:06. This meeting is held virtually. I am Stephen Cleveland, Chair. Would each member of the council please present themselves, starting with Frank?
Frank Fairbanks, member.
Dave?
Dave Roberts, all present and accounted for.
Ron?
Ron Rayner.
At this time, we do have a quorum. Would ADWR staff please introduce themselves? Einav?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Einav Henenson, Active Management Area Director.
This is Melissa Sykes, Water Management Assistance Program Coordinator. And Kennedy Shepard, Groundwater User Advisory Council Coordinator.
Very good. Yesterday, we listened to presentations about 13 different programs and projects that were submitted for consideration to receive groundwater conservation grant funding. Today, we will discuss the proposals and we would like to prioritize them. Before we start the discussion, I would like to have DWR staff go over the process, and then there's a couple of questions that I have before we begin the implementation. Our ultimate goal is to develop recommendations to the Department of Water Resource Director. So at this time, Melissa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yesterday was dedicated to the applicant presentations, and today will be focused on discussion and prioritization of the proposed projects. Each GUAC member evaluated the strengths of the applications according to the different components specified in the grant notice of funding opportunity. The members' average evaluations are listed in this evaluation spreadsheet here in this column under the application strength average. This will help start the project discussion and prioritization process. Throughout your discussion, in addition to the application strength, please consider how the project will meet the needs of the AMA, the cost effectiveness of the project, groundwater conservation potential, project impact, the project's innovative quality, and any other factors you deem relevant. Note that while education projects may not be able to measure groundwater savings, they can measure their impact by demonstrating, for example, the number of people that are reached or the entities that are reached by their project. GUAC members will discuss each project in its turn, after which each member will be asked to assign the project an evaluation score from 1 to 100, and I'll put that here, which will be averaged in our final column at the end of this spreadsheet. Each project can be discussed for a maximum of 15 minutes, and if we have time at the end, we can rediscuss some of the projects. After all projects have been evaluated, we will reorganize the list from highest to lowest score, and members will have the opportunity to discuss and reevaluate the prioritized list according to including modifying any of their scores. The final prioritized list of projects will then be given to the ADWR director to make his final decision. Before we begin the process, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Yes, Melissa, this is Stephen. One question is, what is the deadline for our recommendations to the director for these grant funds?
Chair Cleveland, this is Zainab here. So we hope that by the end of our meeting today at 5 p.m. or earlier, we would have the final prioritized list to take to the director. We would like to make final decisions by beginning to mid-July, and Phoenix AMA is the first AMA to have this grant process, the grant GUAC meetings. We're going to have those meetings in the other 4 AMAs, and then provide all lists to the director to make final decisions. So to answer your question, hopefully by the end of today, we would have the final prioritized list by the Phoenix GUAC.
The reason I ask this of staff and for council consideration is that my understanding is we have about $1.3 million in funding. We have more than that. We may have, after we conclude, we may have all projects that exceed that number sizably. Therefore, some questions are, do we have the ability to work at allocating smaller dollar amounts, awarding, recommending smaller dollar amounts to various projects? What is the consequence of that action? Further, do we have the needed information that would be able to accomplish that? And is the criteria that we're using based upon our own feeling, or is there some absolute numbers such as groundwater savings? And I had one other project or one other concept I wanted to put on the table. I'll hold that for a moment, but each of you may have a thought in your mind as to how the allocation might be for each of the projects. Oh, the last thing was, Melissa, if you go back to your score sheet just for a moment. The application strength average, did everybody use the same scoring formula? By example, I followed the memo, which basically said the important pieces were numbers 2, 3, 4, and 10. Therefore, I did not score some of the other categories. Are these averages all based on the same values used by everyone, or are some of these numbers different based on additional variables? I just need to know that up front.
Mr. Cleveland, so I can take that. This is enough. So everyone used the same scoring sheet. We have not received it from Mr. Rayner, but he did provide us with some input. But these summarize the average of you, Mr. Roberts, and Mr. Fairbanks. And I believe that Mr. Roberts and Mr. Fairbanks identified and evaluated all of the different criteria. When you and I spoke a few days ago, we did mention that criteria number 2, 3, 4, and 10 would be the most useful for you to evaluate. The other components are pretty much what's written in the notice of funding opportunity. So it's if the applicant have submitted a map. So that's something that we could provide input on. So to help you with your time constraints, those were the most important aspects of the application that we would really needed your input on. So in general, yes, the application strength is everyone used the same exact sheet to score those. And let me also mention that this is only one component of the discussion. As we talked about, there are several other components that we would like you to consider. We talked about the AMA needs, we talked about the groundwater saved, and or the project impact. Melissa touched on it a little bit, and I know I had a conversation with a few of you separately about the importance of education. So education may not have the ability to measure groundwater saved in acre feet, but it has other ways to measure impact, such as the reach, how many students, how many people, how many entities the project has the potential to reach. So consider that groundwater conservation may not necessarily be identified solely with how many acre feet or gallons are conserved, but also the impact of the project beyond the quantitative data.
Right. Does anyone want to provide comment at this time, or do we just trudge through and then raise some of these when we get into looking at them as a whole?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ron Rayner.
Yes, Ron.
I'm sorry that I didn't apply numeric factors for every one of those items on the score sheets, but I was concerned about winding up with the problem that we're going to have now with all those scores, because I couldn't figure out how to differentiate the scoring levels between each of those applications. I mean, you were talking about a monumental chore if I was going to try to do that right, to go through 13 applications and trying to assign a numeric value down through that list. And
Sure.
the thing that I did was I created a numeric ranking system over each one of them, as I felt like that they met the requirements of the score sheet. And so that way I could differentiate between the presentations. And then after that ranking was done, after the presentations were made, I changed my rankings. And then I've also got some questions beside each of the rankings that I've made now, that I would not place them in the order that I have unless they were willing to accept a reduction in the amount of the grant. And if they weren't, well, then that moved them out and we moved down to the next one. So
Sure.
Then I added up the amount of money that we had, and I think we ran out of money at my number 7 if a couple of the applicants were willing to reduce the size of the grant. And so that was how I went about it. And so I have my rankings that I've listed in my order, because I can see some problems you're going to have right now with the numeric rankings that you've already got. You've got so many that are so close together. I don't know how you're going to differentiate between those.
I think, Mr. Rayner, what we're going to end up with is we're going to be at the card table and we're going to deal on those that we like that make the greatest sense and work down through and with caveats as needed on this first run, which staff expects that we'll be going through a second run. So we're not locked into our very first set of numbers here.
Sure, right.
Let me say that I'm open to any idea, and I think as we go through this, we should consider any option for doing the best job we can of this. As I looked at it, and I did not see, there are a few really good projects here, but there's a whole bunch of projects that I guess I would describe as kind of ordinary. There's people seeking grants for meters. Well, there's probably every private water company and every municipal water entity in the valley could have submitted a grant for brand new electronic meters, and they would have been valid and it could have been funded. And there's nothing wrong with that. if that project comes up to the top and we all think it's so good that it ought to be funded, well, let's fund it. But if it ended below where kind of the cut line was, I'm not sure that's the end of the world, because I don't know what's going to happen on some of these projects when we give great big old grants to this company or that company or this city. And then other cities and other companies are already doing these exact same things with their own money. So I guess I'm willing to let it fall where it is. But to me, it's not the end of the world if we get to the bottom of the list. The projects that I think will follow the bottom of the list are so kind of normal and ordinary, not bad, that if they didn't make it, they just didn't make it.
Mr. Chairman, this is
Dave, do you have some thoughts?
I'm with Frank.
Okay, so let's play it by ear and understand we're going to be flexible, and as ideas come up, nobody shoots it down as a bad idea. All righty. So Melissa, what is my first charge here?
Mr. Cleveland, before we start, just in case we have new members of the public who haven't participated yesterday, Kennedy is going to cover very, very briefly some of the webinar logistics before we start the discussion, if that's okay with you.
Please proceed and give me 2 minutes before we get back on with you. Okay.
Okay, good morning. Oh, afternoon. It's afternoon. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, just kind of what I said yesterday, please just make sure that you are muted unless you are speaking, because that helps us reduce audio feedback. And again, we also have a lot of items on our agenda today. So if you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the chat and we will get to them during the call to public. Also during the call to public, if you are interested in speaking, please type your name in the chat box and I will be more than happy to unmute you. Finally, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, our ADWR help desk is available for you and their information can be found on the screen. And that is all I have.
Okay, it's my turn.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so at this point, we're going to go through, and I will ask that, you want me to give my comments first, right? Einav, or do you want me to go through the others and I'd be last?
However you would like to do it, Mr. Chair, we thought to go through the projects one by one. Melissa pulled on the spreadsheet, so you could look at the first project we heard about, which is Arizona State University, ASU Tempe Bronze Irrigation Modernization. So we can time about 15 minutes for this discussion, after which each member would be asked to provide an evaluation number, and we'll then average that number and move on to the second item on the list, if that works for all of you.
So each of us get 3.5 minutes to discuss the project, and then we turn it to the next person, and then we score, give our scores to you at the end of that period.
Question?
Yes, Melissa would put in the information.
Yes. Frank?
When we do that score that you just described, is that a 1 to 5 score, 1 to 10, 1 to 100? What, just so that as we talk about it, we can be thinking about the number. Do you know, you said after we all discuss, we're going to come up with a rating or a number. Do you have a criteria or a range you're looking for?
So we were thinking 1 to 100 to allow for some flexibility. If you were to go with 1 to 10, you may want to assign something 8.5. But if you prefer a different variety between, instead of 0 to 100, we're more than open to get your thoughts, but we just thought it would allow for most flexibility with the scoring.
I personally don't care. I just would like to know what the criteria is so that I could be thinking about it as we discuss the project.
Okay, so unless there are no objections, we would propose 0 to 100.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, David?
On this one, I'm going to have to recuse myself, so there'll have to be a not applicable or something put in my column there
Yes.
for this particular one, and you guys will get an extra few minutes to talk about this one.
Okay, that's on the ASU Tempe project.
That's correct.
Okay. So Melissa,
Chairman.
you have fast action there.
Mr. Chairman, this is Ron Rayner.
Yes, Ron.
How about each one of us just giving our ranking of each of the projects? So we have 13 projects. We just go right down the list, start up with Arizona State. Somebody might have it number 1, I might have it number 3. And we just go right down the list. And with the 4 of us, we've assigned everything on our list with a number from 1 to 13. Then we add those up and see who comes out with the lowest score is going to be on top, and they're going to separate out. And then, if need be, I mean, there's going to be some caveats in mine. Like there's a couple of them they're going to have to accept a smaller grant for it to fit on my scoring sheet that way. But I think that we're going to arrive at a ranking much more quickly doing it that way.
And I think what you're suggesting then, everybody puts their score on the table, then we talk about why we scored them the way we did.
Yeah, but 1 through 13, not with having a bunch of them all with the same score, because then you're still going to have to sort them out.
Well, either way, instead of me talking about the project and then I give you my score 20 minutes later.
Yeah.
Objection to Ron's suggestion?
No objection from me.
How are you, Frank?
I'm okay with that. Whatever people want to do, I'm okay with.
Okay. Well, let me make a mess of it by starting out at the very beginning, and I'll be the guinea pig on what Ron's talking about. I have 3 projects that all scored number 1 based upon a total score of 84. Okay.
You're a hard grader.
Oh, but see, I didn't use all of the variables. I only used variables 2, 3, 4, and 10.
Okay.
Okay, so that's why my numbers are going to be where they are. So for the moment, Melissa, place number 1 in the Superior project, Arizona Water Company. Number 1 in the Project Wet. Number 1 in the Gary Woodward trap cooling. So the next number available would be number 4. Put that in EPCOR for the Pecan New Magma project. And number 4 in the ESSER project. And those were scores of 80 in my process. And then it is the Gary Woodward water efficiency audits, a score of 79. Maricopa Water District, 79. Arizona Water ESRI, a 77.
Mr. Chair, can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
So maybe if you don't mind, let me just go through our thought process of why we thought it would be useful to discuss each project. And I know that at least 3 of you evaluated the applications, but that is just, again, it's one component. So what I would ask is if you want to assign 1 to 13 numbers for the applications, please do still consider the other aspects of the project, such as innovative quality, such as cost effectiveness, not only the score that you assign the actual application components itself. I would also mention that the idea of having a discussion of each project is to allow exchange of ideas and thoughts among members. So there may be something that Mr. Fairbanks have got out of a presentation and reading the application that another member may have not thought about that way. So having that discussion would allow you to discuss about the project and the benefits to the AMA and all those components that we just discussed in a little more detail than just your own impression of the project. So I just wanted to put it out there to explain the thought process that we had about the discussion. If you decide that you want to go from 0 to 13, that's totally fine. If you want to provide some of the numbers in advance, that's also totally fine with us. But I think there should be some sort of a discussion among the members on different projects at some point.
I agree that there will be a discussion on why we put them where we put them. It was a question of when in the process, I guess.
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, this is Dave.
Yes, Dave.
After we get all the scores down, we can go through each one of them, or at least see where there's some similarities and have some discussion about maybe where we have big differences, or if we have some clarifications, we can talk about them then.
Yes, I like that. That's similar to what I was thinking. I think it achieves what ANOV and staff are trying to achieve. It's just coming in the back door a little bit.
And that's totally fine with us. So if you want to continue with this, that's great. I think we lost you under Mr. Woodard's project of water efficiency. You said 79. Can we assign it, or 7.9? Can we assign it an 8?
Well, I have a quick.
Well, this was 79 points out of 100. I gave you.
It's number 6 on your list, though, right?
Yeah, what I have to do is I have to convert all of my 1 to 100 to 1 through 13 before I can give, which number do you want?
Okay, well, you did that on the first.
I managed to on the first 2, yes.
Okay.
So to be clear, the project wet, I gave it the highest score of an 84, and I numbered it number 1 in terms of rank order, as you're saying 1 through 13. Does that make sense, Einov?
So currently we have Project Wet as number 1. You also mentioned Water Resources Consulting. Yeah, you have a few others that are number 1. Do you want to assign number 2 and 3 for those, or do you want to keep them all under number 1?
I would think you'd have to spread those out. This is Ron.
Okay,
I'll be operating on the same schedule, so just pick out the
make Superior Transmission number 2.
Yeah, okay.
Make Woodard project number 3.
Which Woodard project?
The minimizing trap cooling.
Yes. And number 4 then becomes Woodard's water efficiency audit. Number 5 becomes the Maricopa Water District's North Avenue lateral. Number 6 is the Esser's design, the video project. Number 7 is the EPCOR Pecan to New Magma. Number 8 is ESRI's ArcGIS. Nine is El Mirage. 10 is the leak detection. 11 is flood control. 12 is the ASU. 13 is the meter replacement. Did I get to where you wanted me to be?
Yes, we have all categories filled now.
Okay, sorry, Anov. So,
No, that's all fine.
Mr. Fairbanks, would you give us your numbers?
Sure, I did not, this forced ranking I didn't do before just now, and I did it as we've talked. And so as we do go through this process, I want to say that I might change some because I did it in about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I really pulled the whole thing in 3 minutes, but here they are. In the order we did them, ASU 8, Arizona Water Company meter project 12, Arizona Water Company ArcGIS, the GIS system 11, Arizona Water Company leak detection 3, Arizona Water Company water main superior 7, El Mirage water conservation 5, EPCOR water reclamation 4, Esser movies 6, Durango flood control 9, Northern Avenue lateral 13, Project Wet 2, Woodward Bio 10, and Woodward HOA 1.
Okay, Mr. Ritter, your numbers?
Okay, starting at the top, ASU 3, Arizona Water Company 12, Arizona Water Company 9, Arizona Water Company 11, Arizona Water Company 13, City of El Mirage 6. And that's only if they will reduce the amount to 100,000 from 150. EPCOR 4, if they'll reduce that number by half to 250,000.
Mr. Renner, if you think that would be useful, we could add a column to the right with comments, and we
Okay,
can add your comments, but you'll have to give us a couple of
sure.
seconds
Okay,
here.
I'll just finish the ranking and then we'll put the comments on it. The Esser design 2, Again, it has to be reduced. Flood control district, again, it needs to be reduced, number 8. Maricopa Water District, 5, if it's reduced. Project Wet, number 1. Gary Woodward, 7, and Gary Woodward, 10.
Are you ready for me?
Yes, Dave?
Okay. I couldn't rate the ASU one, so
Yes.
Arizona Water Company leak detection is 12 on my list. The ArcGIS is number 4. Excuse me, I got those two reversed. So leak detection is 7, sorry. ArcGIS is 4, meter replacement is 12. The superior transmission is 11. El Mirage is 10. EPCOR is 6. ESSER is 9. Flood control is 8. MWD, I'm going off my list, I don't know if it's the same as yours, is 3. The U of A, Project Wet is 2. The Woodward HOA is 4. And the Woodward trap is number 1.
Okay, I just saw an error I made in my numbers. When I went down my list, I read meter score as the second project, and I gave it a 12. But on this list here, you've got leak detection number, the second one. So would you switch my second and fourth number, Frank Fairbanks? So instead of 8, 12, 11, 3, it ought to be 8, 3, 11, 12.
Okay, Melissa, can you do that? Take Frank Fairbanks, number 12, change to a
Yes.
3.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we can do that.
So I meant to score the leak detection high and the meter lower, and I just had a different order on my piece of paper.
Yeah.
I also have an error on Gary Woodard's.
This is for Dave Roberts.
Yeah, the number 4 should be a 5 on Gary Woodard's.
It should be what?
That should be a 5, the bottom one.
Okay.
There you go. Not, I can't have 2 4s.
Okay, do we see any other apparent errors in our columns?
So please do take, I would ask members to take a minute or two to review the numbers and make sure that everything is accurate. And we'll work on adding that comment section so we can add your comments as you talk about the project.
I think that Ron brought up a very good idea, and I think staff has figured out a way to accommodate several of the questions that I had earlier with Ron, so we'll be in good shape when we work on this. Go ahead, staff, you do your work.
GUAC members, I just would like to point out that the Arizona Water Company projects are not listed in the way they were in the agenda and the presentation. So if you can just verify that your numbers for those 4 projects are correct.
That's why mine were backwards, but they're now correct.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Fairbanks. Mr. Chair, so we organized the projects from smallest number to largest. So those projects that are on the top of the list are the ones that received the best scores from members.
So you,
Mr. Chairman,
He must be muted.
in his receiving the message.
but I was not transmitting. Pardon me.
So Mr. Chairman, this is Dave again. I have some comments on some of mine as well. So when we're done here, I'd like to add those in as well.
I think each one of us will have comments that will affect whether they stay in the same ranking.
Okay.
Good observation. Ron, do we have all of your comments listed?
Let's see, they just had to do with reducing the amounts. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, I've got 5. So I've got one on Maricopa Water District, a reduction. let me get back to the other side. Okay, and then with flood control district, theirs was gonna be down fairly low anyway, but I cut that down to 200,000. And the ESSER design, if they could change that proposal to just maybe do the videos for 250,000. You know, part of my thinking on each of these is that those ones that are so big, they chew up all the money in a hurry.
Right.
There's so many that are worthy that if we can get part of the proposal funded, then have enough money to do some more. And then we've got the new Magma one and the El Mirage one. So I had 5 on my list that I marked for reductions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. Dave, would you please start at the top and identify what project so do you have any comments for Project West?
No, I don't.
Okay, no changes, et cetera, conditions. Anything for the HO?
No.
Okay, EPCOR?
Well, the EPCOR one, I mentioned this yesterday in the discussion with Doug as to whether or not they would be willing to increase their to the aquifer, so to speak, so that this money would actually go to saving some groundwater, because this is a groundwater savings facility project, and that they're saving 5%, but they probably do that anyway. They're probably going to build this project anyway, and if we're going to help support the project, we ought to get some groundwater savings benefit. So Doug seems to be open to that, and I think it's something that we ought to talk with him further about how much he'd be willing to leave in the aquifer and not recover for our investment of 500,000 or 250, whatever we decide.
This is Ron Rayner. I agree with Dave, and I think that's it's a good project. You know, it shows a lot of the volume of water that's saved, that's not pumped, but it's a good financial deal for them. Somebody recognized that, I think, right away after they took it over from Johnson's, apparently, and so absolutely. I mean, they should do that. Just from on the face of it, it produces a great enough return. If you had to go out and borrow the money and do it, it should be good for them. But I think, having said that, it doesn't hurt us to make an investment in it when it's going to produce that big a return.
On the same project, in the staff summary that they had done previously, they had identified 2,200 acre-feet per year was expected to be achieved through this project, offset, so they would be offsetting groundwater pump by that amount for the 500,000. Your question is, can we get 2,000 acre-feet for 250,000? Is that basically it?
Well, Mr. Chairman, they're agreeing to deliver that water and save that groundwater, but it would be saved as long-term storage credits. So eventually that water is going to be pumped, all but 5% of it. And the idea would be to increase that cut from maybe 5 to 10 for some period of time, or some number that we can get for our investment, because if they build this anyway, they're going to leave 5% for the aquifer without our funding. But if we're going to help fund it, we ought to have some additional savings of groundwater. That's the concept. It seemed like Doug was open to that, but we need to have more discussion with him about what they're willing to do.
So, Ron, your thing.
That was a little garbled, but I support that. I think it's a good idea to leave a little extra for the aquifer, and I think that they can just agree to do that as part of the deal.
So, at the moment we have a discussion going here to cap the project at $250,000. Is it kind of Ron's motion and seconded by Dave, and that the cut to the aquifer should be a minimum of 10.
Well, I think we need to have some discussion with him about what that number would be. I mean, if we're going to cut our investment to 250, if he's open to that, then maybe it's an additional 5% for 5 years or something of that nature.
Right.
Okay.
Frank, thought?
So really, with the whole list, this $1.2 million, which we're going to spend, is about saving groundwater. And I think we need to make sure that if we spend $1.2 million, we have some real life groundwater that we can identify that was saved through these projects.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I like this project and rated it high was there really is some groundwater here that really can be saved. I don't have a problem with the 500,000, but if the committee wants to go to 250, I can accept that. I think it's just the kind of project we got to be pointing to where groundwater is saved, we can quantify it, it's real, it's solid, and it's not sort of some BS suggestion that if we do this good project, we're going to save some water. Here we got real water. So I can go along with this. I would just hope, and I really like Dave's idea of trying to really capture some of it, where we can really say, look, we spent this money and we really got some water left in the ground and it's going to stay there. I think that's tremendous. If they said, well, good, give us 250, but we won't give you any more water, I think I'd rather give them 5 and get some water, but I'll go along with the committee. However you see that, but I think as we look at all these other projects, in every case, we need to, anytime we fund something, we need to do whatever we can to capture groundwater, to identify savings. And in every case, if there's some little way to keep the water in the ground, we need to do that as part of our responsibility and our commitment to spend this money to keep water in the ground. So I can support the idea. It's not a burning deal for me. I mean, I don't need to cut it, but I could support you all. And I really like Dave's idea of keeping it in the ground, whatever the committee would like to do.
So, Mr. Chairman, I also like the funding at 500,000. So you are now going to be the tiebreaker here.
Well, my opinion is that we should get as much cut to the aquifer as we possibly can. The 5% is mandatory, therefore we don't have to finance the project at all. So what is the value of the $500,000 as a cut to the aquifer? Is it 5% additional or is it 10% additional on top of the minimum requirement? I would say if we're going to give 500,000, they have to give us 10. The 5 that's required plus 10 additional.
Okay, well, Doug is probably listening to us talk about this, so he knows our negotiating position.
Sure. Sure.
So we can talk through it with them, okay?
Okay.
Well, let me throw out one other aspect of this. Doesn't have much to do with whether we award this at the full amount or half, but I'm a longtime supporter of direct use of effluent for agriculture because it's a smart thing to do with water that's still got a little impairment, like it's probably got some extra nitrogen and phosphates in it and maybe a few other biologicals that wouldn't be too great to be putting right down into the aquifer underneath. But when you put it on the ground, a lot of biological activity occurs that really makes a lot of those problems go away. They become inert. A lot of the nutrient levels are used by the plants. And it's just a much better way to give final treatment to to wastewater is by putting it on a crop. It really is.
So we restate this proposal to that the applicant already has a responsibility to do a cut to the aquifer, and it was intending to do a GSF. So our $500,000 is to secure another 10% cut to the aquifer.
That's correct.
So Dave, you good with that?
I'm good with that. I mean, we need to talk to Doug about that as we go. Yep.
I'm fine with that.
Ron, you good with that?
Yes, the way it's stated. Yeah.
Frank, you good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is a preliminary. We're not to the final decisions and recommendations to the director, so we have time to think about it, but that's trying to create on that project. Okay, and that project has a value of 5.25.
Okay. Yep. So the other one that I wanted to talk about was the Northern Avenue lateral surface water. So this is the one
MWD.
that, yeah, this is the one that Andrew brought forward yesterday. And it really wasn't in the application, but he pointed out that if this lateral was repaired, that they could deliver water to Adamant Mutual, which could potentially save another 2,500 acre feet of water. So one of the questions I have for Andrew on this, and that's a substantial amount of water. That's 2,500 acre feet every year, from what I understand. And one of the questions I have for Andrew is, if that was to happen, would that water be delivered for direct use by Adamant, or would it be delivered under a groundwater savings facility or something of that nature? So that's a question for Andrew. If it's groundwater savings, it doesn't save as much groundwater because then there's somebody's earning credits for it. But if it's for direct delivery in lieu of pumping for Adamant, that's a lot of groundwater that could be saved for this level of investment. And I think we ought to seriously consider funding the full amount and getting that much savings of groundwater, if in fact that truly can happen. And we just need to know for sure how that can truly happen.
Sorry, I just wanted to point out that Andrew is available to answer questions. Mr. Chair, if you would like to take answers or comments from the presenters, or if you want to keep it for later, but he's available.
Well, we may as well have him answer.
Is that on?
Okay, Mr. Roberts and other members of the committee, that would be direct, offsetting direct use. So the well water that Adamant currently serves agriculture. If we were to deliver surface water to them, it would not be water that's stored. It would be direct use that would go directly to the farms that they currently serve with wells.
And conceptually, that means that they can shut down well pumping, correct?
Correct.
Okay, David?
Well, if that's the case, this is a lot of groundwater that can be saved for the level of investment there. I think it's something we should strongly consider. That's why I rated it a 3, because I thought if it was delivered that way, it should be rated pretty high.
Where is it in the list?
It's number 8.
6.5?
Or it's 6.5 on the, it's number 5, I guess, on the list, or 6 on the list.
Let me address this one. And it looks like it's right around what would be funded. And the reason it's as low as it is because of my score. Because the other three of you actually rated it higher, and it would probably be in the rating zone. So let me say this. My problem with the project was I recently was riding my bike up there, and I saw the level of development in that area. And it's hard for me to believe, and I know the houses right along Northern are old, big houses. There's so much development up there. It's hard for me to believe a lateral is going to really be needed 5 years from now. But put that aside, forget about it. I would be willing to lower my 13, which would way bounce it up the score because I'm the one pulling it down. If there was some way to know that there's a reduction in groundwater pumping. As I listened to the project yesterday, it sounded like we were just moving water around. And that didn't look like a very high priority to me. But if in fact, as Dave is saying, this would result in a significant reduction in pumping in some way, and I don't know that you can always legally regulate it, but if there's some way to have the sense that there would be reduced pumping, I think that's what this money should be about. And I could raise my number, which would kind of easily raise the average number of the project up higher in the list.
Or lower on the list, giving it a higher score because of ranking. The lower the number in the average, the higher the ranking, the improved the ranking.
Yeah, if my
what
13 went to a 6, it would go way up. It would be funded.
That's correct. You want to move your 13 to a number? What do you want to swap?
To do that, if somebody has some kind of sense that we can get any sort of commitment, this really does result in reduced groundwater pumping.
So I think we need to ask MWD, Andrew, and Adam if that commitment can be made. I mean, we need to, as part of the grant contract, that needs to be somehow documented, or at least somehow we can track that that's actually going to happen.
This is Andrew. That certainly could be done. So 250 acre feet of the total is directly under the control of MWD. We know that we utilize this well when we are maxed out on capacity. If we had the additional capacity in the lateral, we know that we would not pump, MWD would not pump an additional 250 acre feet of groundwater a year. The savings from Adamant, when we brought this to them following the submittal of this grant proposal, they said that they would like to double the amount of water that they take on the Northern Avenue lateral. Last year, they took 2,700 acre feet between January and November. So, I rounded down to 2,500. I will, reach out to them and see what kind of formal commitment we could get from them that would say, if you provide us a unit of groundwater or a unit of surface water, that we would not pump a unit of groundwater.
This is Stephen, the chair. It has been suggested by Mr. Rayner that the allocation of 250,000, I believe it was by 100,000. Does that create a problem?
Personally,
you do the project for 150.
That I'd have to take up the chain and see what money we would have available for other capital improvement projects and where we could move our maintenance budget around. I think that's something that NWD would certainly entertain, but I'm not the one in charge of the maintenance budget.
And Mr. Rayner, with the discussion we've just had, are you willing to consider adjusting the 150 reduction, increasing it to 200,000 by example?
Oh, sure. I mean, the only reason they even considered reducing that was because that is a nice addition to the water supply underground, is to just cover a few more projects on our list. So, whichever way we can do it. I mean, if we can, we may just have to not fund another project at the bottom here.
Yeah.
Um,
The other piece,
Mr. Chairman?
going back to who's speaking.
Mr. Chairman, it's Dave again. I have a question
Yes.
for Andrew on that. So Andrew, have you considered applying for a Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart grant to help with funding of this as well? Is that on your radar screen?
Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart grants are on my radar screen, not for this particular project though.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. From,
I think what we've been doing is really good, but I think as we do it, we have to keep in mind that as a committee, what we're doing is making recommendations. And
Yes.
that we really have no ability to guarantee this funding. It's the director will consider our recommendation, and then I guess it's him that would decide what the offers might be. I also worry, I would suppose that staff would be entering into negotiation with the contractors, with the fundees for different provisions, but it would be their responsibility to do that negotiation. So while I've been supportive of both of these discussions, I'm not opposed to them. I think we do need to remember that in the end, it's the director's decision, and that it probably is not our job to be cutting all these deals. I mean, I think it's fine for us to say, well, what if, or it would be nice if you could do this, but somebody else probably ought to be doing the real negotiation.
Yes, that's true, Frank. We're just helping the director with the scope of those discussions and negotiations.
and fine tuning, making sure that he's got all the information. I would add one additional point to the lateral project, and that is Luke Air Force Base and this land subsidence that is occurring around has some opportunity to that subsidence could see some mitigation as a result of projects like this.
I agree with that, Mr. Chairman. That's why I rated this to be high. Yep.
You agree? Okay. So staff, if you can add beneficial to the mitigating subsidence around. Okay, we've gotten through two of Ron Rayner's.
Hang on just one second in order to kind of close that discussion. Why don't we switch my 13 on the Northern Avenue lateral with my 7 on the Superior transmission main, which then I think would bounce the lateral way up the list. If we think this is what we want to do.
I support that.
I support it. Ron?
Sure, yes.
Okay, so preliminary indication are that we support, number one, we support the shift of priorities, and we see a benefit of doing this. So let's go, Ron, to your ESSER design project for that's the video program. You're suggesting reducing it to 250,000 from 496,000. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Dave. I'm in agreement with that. And I'm hoping that they can find some other funding sources as well.
Yeah, this is Ron. I mean, it sounded like a well thought out program, especially to introduce a number of new videos. But we've already put some money into the educational program up at the top. And this one is certainly worthy, but it's such a big number, it really limits our ability to award other grants.
Any further discussion on the,
I support Ron 100% on this. It's what he said. I agree with completely. It's a nice thing to do, but we already have a lot of money in education. So if we can cut it back, that's better.
okay. I'm supportive of that. Mr. Schwartz, what project are you with?
It's Carrie.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, Carrie Schwartz. I just wanted to let you know that I was on in case there was anything that you all wanted to ask, and I just put that in the
What
chat.
project are you working?
I'm in collaboration with Esser Design, and so I think that was the one that you all were just talking about. Yeah.
Did you catch enough of our conversation to get a sense of our desire to give you money, but not?
Yes. Yes, and I think that we have a huge project that we scoped out, and so certainly we could look at it and rescope. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so Ron, I moved to the El Mirage Water Conservation Program. You have a suggestion of reducing the 150 to 100,000?
Yes, part of Project WET's their direction was on the West Valley. And so they're already going to be working on quite a educational program for the West Valley. So I thought that El Mirage had one on theirs too. And I thought, that was kind of redundant with Project WET. So felt like that they wanted to do a project it's really great to get them involved, but that maybe not at that big a number.
Oh. Okay, staff, I would ask you to encourage the applicant to collaborate with the Project WET. Okay. Any
Mr. Chair, it's my
comments?
understanding, and maybe
did you have a specific question?
I just wanted to mention that both this project and Arizona Project WET are going to be, at least the ESSER is in collaboration with Project WET, so they are aware of both projects. But maybe either Sandra or Carrie would like to add more to that.
Yeah, this is Sandra. I had taken the lead on the groundwater education component grant that we had talked about yesterday. Was there a specific question that you had in terms of how that was going to be delivered, or?
No, Sandra, the point is, go ahead, Ron. You're just.
My point was that Project WET had quite an educational program outlined to be delivered to the West Valley through the school system. And on the El Mirage proposal, they also had an educational component. And I was just recommending that if we want to fund the El Mirage one, that it be a smaller number because they could coordinate with Project WET for something that's already being done. So there wouldn't be redundancy. But it was for the El Mirage proposal that it be reduced.
And we had worked with El Mirage. As a matter of fact, last year we helped them with some of the groundwater issues in their school district, and part of the school district. So we have worked with Derek last year.
Sure. Okay, good.
Good. Okay, so among the council members, any objection to the suggestion that this project be considered at $100,000 level and encourage the applicant to collaborate with Project GUAC?
I'm okay.
What portion of,
I'm okay. I'm
Okay.
There's a few others on my list that I thought that were more worthy, but I'm okay.
well, we'll get. I think one left, and it's the Durango campus for the flood control district retrofit. And you wanted to take the project from 500,000 to 300,000.
Yes.
From council members, right?
You know, frankly, I wonder if we're going to get to it. So, but I don't, if we do get to it, 300 is okay, but I'm not sure we've been adding as we go down the list.
We ran out of money a long time ago.
We're not doing any additions at the moment, gentlemen. I will say that Mr. Hussey, Rob Hussey, is now on the line with us. What we're talking about is that the Durango Flood Control Project is a little too rich for us at $500,000, but we are willing to consider in our preliminary discussions here reducing it to 300,000, and then we will rescore these numbers as we move forward. So for Mr. Hussey, please think about how far can you get with 300,000, and can you squeeze the county for a little bit more money to be a partner in this. Any comment, Mr. Hussey?
Hello, I'm not sure if you can hear me. My name is Harry Cooper. I am with the Flood Control District of Maricopa County as well.
Okay, Ms.
And I would just like to let you know that we are would certainly be interested in any funding. I think exposure to the project with backing from ADWR in this process is worth any funding. We do have a commitment from the county to move forward with this project, and this is a nice addition to help build capacity and showcase the merits of the project and the connection to water conservation in the state. So, if there's anything available, we'd be willing to entertain that value based on your committee's recommendations.
Mr. Rayner, thank you for your suggestion. Council members, any additional thoughts on this?
Mr. Chair.
At $300,000, assuming there's money. Well, yes, Dave.
I really like this project. I think it's pretty pricey for these funds relative to the amount of groundwater, but I also think it brings in some new ideas. And I would encourage Mr. Cooper to apply for a Reclamation Water Smart grant, because I think this is probably something that is worthy of a grant to go along with any funding that we may be able to provide, or the county or others. Because I think this can be applied in other areas within the state that I think would be worthy of these types of things as well. So I like the project overall. I just think from an overall standpoint, the amount of investment from us to the amount of savings of groundwater wasn't as great as some of the other projects.
Thank you for that.
Cooper.
I appreciate that. And again, just to reiterate, we'd be open to any funding and any support from ADWR in order to build that capacity.
Okay. He just said we could take him to zero. I don't think he meant that, but thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Chairman.
Frank?
Chairman, This is Ron Rainer.
Ron?
We did get the supplemental information about the design of that. And, my objection was they were spending an awful lot of money on stormwater retention for, when I say stormwater, it was actually the rooftop capture. And, building cisterns or just using big tanks is very expensive. And there's been work done over the years here, and that it frankly doesn't rain often enough that it gives you the ability to save that water to use, even if you're saving it in an above ground tank. Again, summertime temperatures, whatever water you captured there last winter, by the time it goes through a few days of really high temperatures, you wind up having a lot of that water evaporate, even out of a tank. You'd have to close it some way to keep it from evaporating. And it's just not a very practical approach. And there's been a lot of engineering that's been done trying to prove or disprove whether it is worth doing here in the Salt River Valley. It's common in Tucson, but just barely, I think. So anyway, it was an expensive part that that ran the cost up substantially.
Frank, do you have any comment? Hearing none, I think it's time.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I support what's been said. It's a beautiful project, but I don't see the groundwater savings. It's a wonderful stormwater project, but I don't see the payback to the community for the use of the groundwater funds.
So are you suggesting that additional reduction is appropriate?
I'm just supporting what you all are saying. As I look at this list, I'm surprised that we would get to it.
I agree with Frank on that part.
If it
Understand, but if we did, how can we get to it if we make?
Well, if the list stays the way it is, if the list stays it is, do we make it all the way down to this would be the 11th project?
I don't know, we'll have to ask staff we still got some adjustments to make with some of the other projects. My observation. So let's hold your comments until we get, if you're okay with leaving it for the.
I'm okay.
Okay. Staff, can we go back to the top of the page? Top. Hello? So the question I want to pose to the group, are there, as you look at the project WET, are there any other suggested changes to the program and or the funding for the? Dave, Frank, Ron?
Everything's fine. No changes proposed by me.
I'm comfortable as well.
Yeah, okay with me.
Okay. Ron, you okay?
Yes, it's okay with me.
For the moment, all of us are no. So let's go to the next project, which is the HOA common area project at 163,000. Any changes that we would suggest to that?
Let me say this. I think this is the better of the two projects we have. And their other project looks like it's in the 5th spot. And I think it'd be good to do this project well, and that I don't know if we need to fund both, but that's just an idea. Let me also add, as long as we're looking at this project, that I think we need to put on them some kind of reporting responsibility where they come back with a report on water saved, and to the extent they could get any help from any of the providers they might work with, even a written report saying we saved, I don't know, 37 acre feet of water, and 13 of those acre feet were groundwater. Even if it's only a report, I think we need to keep people's feet to the fire, to be looking for ways to save water generally, but secondly, to be saving groundwater, even though it may not be totally enforceable.
I would support that, and I would suggest first Gary and the management figure out how to include more of the HOA residents in the process to ensure that this has a long, it will not just continue if the management people are out there doing it. At least educate, inform the HOA members of what the audits are about and how they can benefit. Because the HOA members are all about saving, so they should be reticent to this kind of support and reducing it to. So the recommendation at the moment is 162.9. We just did the next project on the laterals. We just did the. Is there any further discussion on the
Mr. Chairman?
pecan?
Mr. Chairman, I have some comments on the HOA program application.
Sure.
So I like the idea that Frank has raised about reporting back to the GUAC about the success of the project and what they accomplished. I would take that further, and I think we ought to have that as a requirement for all of the grants, that there'd be some reporting back to the GUAC about their accomplishments, you know, relative to this funding. So I think it ought to apply to all the grants that are made, for one.
Mr. Chairman, Gary Woodard here. That is currently in the budget to report to you.
Very good, thank you. The other thing I would suggest, Gary, yesterday we talked about how the CAGRD really likes this and would be helpful to them. You did tell us that they plan on putting $10,000 into this program. And that was before they kind of decided to get back into the conservation efforts. And now they're going to. So one of the things that I would be interested in is if we could maybe reduce the funding here from this pot of money and perhaps have you talk to Laura and her staff about getting a little bit more money from the GRD, maybe another 20 or 30,000, and then reduce the amount that would come from us. Something along that line. So that's what I'm thinking about relative to this, because I think this will benefit the GRD because they have a lot of HOAs in their portfolio of customers.
Gary, comment?
I'm happy to have that conversation with Laura. I could probably try to do that tomorrow, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I could on that. I don't know what to expect the response would be. I do know that they were shooting towards taking a conservation plan to their board subcommittee by the end of August or early September. So once again, they'd have to kind of short circuit that process. They have committed 10,000, and they may well be willing to up that. I just can't say.
Okay.
So Mr. Roberts' request is that you consider getting them to up their 10,000 commitment to 30,000.
Yes, and then we would reduce ours by the same amount. And I don't think these monies are going to, and maybe Ina, you can tell us, These monies won't be available till when, later in the year for these projects?
Hey, no.
Yes, sir?
Past experience has been that we go through this decision making, we get it to the director, then you guys begin your formal contract negotiations. When do funds typically then become available to the applicant?
So our usual process is that there are funding available throughout the project. We never provide the funding at the beginning, or at least the full amount of funding, definitely not at the beginning, because there has to be some deliverables. So we have at least 3 deliverables throughout the length of the process. The applicant, or by then is the contractor, provide us with a proof of work and efforts that were done according to the contract, and then there is a certain portion of the fund that is given to them. And usually a certain amount is kept until the absolute last portion of the reporting. So let's say the project has been completed and the applicant provide us with the final report of all the findings, of all the information that was done, and then a certain amount of the funding will be given at the end of the project.
Thank you.
So typically grant funds become available in December after the contract and some of the deliverables. Go ahead.
I think you have, Gary, I think you have some time then to work with Laura to figure this out as part of this. And she's going to have time as well to see if they can come up with the money.
Okay, Mr. Roberts, I will let her know that in my discussion. I should still they'll be able to get back to you, I would think, tomorrow or early next week.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
And Mr. Roberts and Chair Cleveland, just to clarify, we need to have everything in place when we write the contract. So by then we would need to have this information in place.
And when would that be then?
It depends on how long the process of negotiating the contract takes. And don't forget, we would have quite a few contracts to work on between the Phoenix AMA and the other AMAs. So it would take us some time to go through all the contracts, but I would say at least a couple of months.
Okay, and I think by that time, we'll know whether the GRD can help support this financially as well. Gary's contract will be the last contract. He's probably got 2 of them under this AMA. He's only a 2-man job anyway, so he's going to be a busy guy.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Mr.
sir, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I certainly support substituting CAP money for our money, but I think one of the things we need to be careful as we look at all of these is that we don't. And one of the things government, and I should know, one of the things government sometimes does is sort of cheaps out and doesn't come up with the money to do things right, and things end up not being done properly, which is the same as never getting done. So I think it is important that this high priority project does get done and done well. So if it's just a matter of switching money from one thing to the other, I'm fully supportive of that. But I think we need to be careful about reducing the funding for all of these high rated projects in order to fund more of the low rated projects. I'm not sure that's a win in the long run. But again, I support the idea proposed by Dave.
Okay, I'm down the trap cooling, and Mr. Woodard, given that we have been able to position your project on the HOAs as high as they are, that is my preferred project as well. And on your trap project, I would like to see if we can't defer that, even though I initially scored it high.
Mr. Chairman? Yes, may I speak to that for a second? I've been thinking since yesterday about when Einab asked that nasty question about, which of my two children do I prefer, or maybe it was my projects. There's the trap cooling one is highly linear in that if you cut the funding 50%, we could still do 50% as many audits. That isn't true for the HOA one, where there's some interesting fixed costs in there. I wrote this before the pandemic, and at that time I anticipated that hospitals and medical centers would be very interested in participating. I think a lot of hospitals now are highly preoccupied. I would, however, argue that if you could just leave some funding, that this was just more of a demonstration project, because typically the payback period is so darn short, 3 months. If we could get a few of these out there, they might start to sell themselves. In other words, the medical centers might say, yeah, these are no-brainers. You've proven the concept. We can talk to these people at these other hospitals. They vouch that these devices work and that these audits were very worthwhile. So, you could cut this one substantially, and I think it would still be worth pursuing.
So would you be comfortable being able to back up what you just said for $50,000 instead of $89,000?
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, any further questions or comments on? Hearing none, the suggestion is to reduce the $89,000 project to $50,000 for the trap. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Dave.
I just said it was good with me. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, we're moving to the modification of AS Tempe ground area, $150,000. And this is the one. You're recusing yourself from this one?
Yes, I am.
There's a lot of homework that needs to be done in this, and that's why I pushed it down to rank of 12, part of which was the uncertainty of whether or not this project's going to really get priority over some of the others on the campus because of some of the observation. The applicant came back and did describe that they thought that they were going to have a freer hand and be able to move their projects forward, but I think that needs to be explored. And I see it questionable. That's why I'm ranking it as a. You rated it at an 8.
Yeah, I think it's a good project. There's no innovation here. This is what many school districts and cities and counties are doing. This is what we all do. But it's a good thing to do. And if it got funded, that would be wonderful. I am noting that the next one down was the leak detection equipment for, what was it, Arizona Water Company, and they submitted 4 grants, and the leak detection was their highest rated one, And it also potentially has a substantial water savings. So if ASU got funded, that would be wonderful. I sure hope that the leak protection could get funded. And then I don't know how much more of the list we'd get to. I don't know if anybody's drawn a tentative line anywhere. If we keep this priority,
The only project that, well, two issues, I think, and we need to double check with AWC. I think that they said that their ESR project was greater value than the leak detector, but but I agree, the leak detection is going to find water faster. The ESR looked a lot like a lot of paperwork being put into computer. So I would still rate the leak detection higher. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair?
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Melinda,
Arizona Water Company did say that the leak detection equipment replacement project would be the most beneficial of the 4 projects.
Yeah, that's exactly what I heard as well.
okay, so we're all on the same page there.
If that's the case, I'll change my score between those two. Instead of 7, I would make that a 4 and just switch those two.
Okay.
Put them higher up on the list.
Okay, and for the moment, leave it as it is. I want to move us down to this. We're thinking that the other projects aren't going to get funded. I want to have a discussion about the Superior project, and it's a question of whether we can get into that now, since we've filled in all the comments over here on the right. So can we get in the Superior project? It's $90,000 valve. We're going to do, I'm sorry, $40,000 to do both. Or two valves for 90. They were going to add another one themselves, and they were losing a lot of water in between, and they got 16 future ones they still have to do. So, Mr. Wilson, are you there? Can you
Yes, I'm here.
please comment on the importance of getting you some money?
Well, we've prioritized the valves. So the valves that we're working on today are the ones where we think there's the, sort of the greatest bang for the buck in terms of water loss. The largest stretches between valves, and that combined with the number of leaks that we see on those stretches. So while there are 16 other valves, these are the 2 that we feel are the most critical at this time.
So my suggestion, I would like to see us move that project ahead of the ARC GIS project, ERSI.
And if I could make one other comment, you were talking to one of the other applicants who offered them the opportunity to reduce their budget below, I believe there was a $90,000 threshold in the application. We could do the same if it means that we could fit, above the line. We could do 1 valve instead of 2, one of ours and one with grant money, if that helps.
Thank you for that offer. Are you willing for the moment to recognize that your meter replacement project is probably not going to be funded? Mr. Wilson?
Based on the scoring? Is that,
Yeah.
I-
We got $1.2 million.
yeah, yeah, it looks like it's fallen below the line.
So I'm just watching cohorts, considering if we can look for money to get some money into the Superior area that is losing a lot of water because it can't exercise its valve.
They still going up?
So well, let's do this. Shall we take a 5-minute break and then get back to with a discussion point of do we like the rank order or do we want to move some of these projects higher in the?
I'm good with a break.
Everybody want to?
Yes.
Amen.
Amen.
You know, is 5 minutes enough time or do you need another?
Whatever works for you, that's fine for us.
Okay, and would you call me on my phone? Okay,
Sure, will
everybody
do.
go to mute, back in 5 minutes.
Hey, Melissa,
Yes.
are you working on the table here?
Yes.
I think we ought to knock the number 2-1 from 162 to 142.
162. Which one are you referring to?
The second one down, Gary Woodard's.
Okay.
Knock it down to 142 and we'll put his feet to the fire. He has to come up with the other 20.
Good.
Okay.
He can do it. Melissa, is the green and the amount recommended, is that how much money we basically have?
Yes.
Could you write a comment?
The El Mirage would put us slightly over the amount?
Correct. We're looking at 1,259,000 with El Mirage, and we have 245. So we're gonna have 15,000 extra. I believe we could use some for that amount. I believe we can pull some withdrawal fees to cover for that, given it's only 14,000.
Where would you pull that from?
From the withdrawal fees. We'll have to verify with legal if we can do it, but I don't know if that's something that we won't be able to. I don't see why we won't.
Okay, I was thinking we could pull it from the Tucson AMA.
I'll let you talk to the the GUAC members there. We'll see how that conversation goes.
That was a joke.
I know.
Okay, no. So
Well, I think that looks like a pretty good plan. We probably need to talk to EPCOR and Doug about the 250 and how that fits into his project and what he's willing to do for 250.
And pertains to him.
I see that Doug is back on the call, so maybe when we get back to session, he could chime in on his thoughts.
I worry a little bit about us negotiating these things to the nth degree in this public meeting.
Yes.
And we're not 100% sure that the director's on board. He probably is, but he does have his prerogative.
Yeah, he's not obligated.
We're just helping him find the parameters. What's possible.
Right, that's good.
And Ron is saying where the value added is.
It's called painting somebody into the corner.
$250,000, man.
I felt a little bit like I was playing Let's Make a Deal in there for a while.
You weren't.
You asked for some specific reporting, so we were putting words in Tom's mouth then.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I know.
I caught that.
But I'm good with reporting. I think all of them should have reporting.
Absolutely.
Well, I think the other thing we need to remember is this was always intended as a competitive process. I like competitive processes where the best ideas, the best projects go to the top. You can always have disagreement over what the best projects are, but competitive processes are healthy. And I think it's a mistake to end up ruining good projects just to make sure that everybody gets a little bit of pork. I mean, money.
You're right.
If we didn't want to work hard, we have 1.3 million or so. We could have just said, "I'll give each one of them 100,000 and see what they can do with it." But
Right.
that wouldn't produce anything.
Mr. Chair, I believe we should get into session.
Okay. McCullis will resume session. It's now 3:10 and 3:09 to be exact. While we were offline, when we took the break, I asked staff to add some more information to us with column E, which is amount recommended compared to the requested, which was the amount requested. And you'll see the column D is hidden at the moment. And that was because it had other data that was not necessary for the discussion. I asked staff to look at how far will the funding amount of 1.2 million that is available for the grants program, how far will it fund us if we funded as the applications were submitted? And that's in column C. Then based upon, and there needs to be verification of this, based upon the comments section, staff quickly pulled the numbers over and put them in column E to identify what projects could be funded as a result of the lesser amount from, or amounts taken from column C. Everybody with me at the moment?
Yes.
And where that puts us is everything in green is conceptually in this model is fundable at those amounts, with the last project in column E, which is the El Mirage project, is partially funded. Is that a correct statement, Melissa?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct. And I believe 85,000 will remain available, so that would be the short is 15,000.
So if we wanted to spend that remaining 85,000, we could take the project 13 down here, which is the superior transmission valve, and move one of those up and consume that $45,000.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, so we could fund City of El Mirage with a minus of 15.
Minus 15, okay.
So El Mirage would, if you could calculate all of the projects in the darker green, there will be 85 or so thousand remaining for the next project, which would be El Mirage.
85 out of the 100,000, out of the 150,000 originally requested?
Correct, out of the 100,000. If we're looking again on the column to the right on column E.
So it's open for discussion. How does everybody like the adjusted numbers based upon the commentary that we've had previous to this for possible recommendations to the director?
And Mr. Chair, I also wanted to bring something up. So you had a discussion about EPCOR suggestions, and Mr. Dunham was not on the call. He's back on the call. So if you have any specific questions for him, I would suspect he would be able to take them.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and speak with, is this Doug Dunham?
Correct.
Yes, this is Doug.
Doug, this is Stephen Cleveland, Chair. We've had a discussion which suggests that your project for Pecan New Magma be reduced from 500,000 to 250,000. We then went to the column, which is the comment section, where it was that if we were to restore part of that money, that we would like to see, in addition to the mandatory 5% that the state requires for groundwater, is this a GFS, guys?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so a GSF facility has to have 5% cut to the aquifer. The discussion was what would happen if we restored $250,000 back. We would do it. We would recommend to the director that if you would agree to a cut to the aquifer of an additional 10% for that $250,000 increase. Did I summarize that fairly, Frank? Dave?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we were talking about the 10% as part of the 500,000, so I think it would be maybe an additional 5% for 250,000.
I'd agree.
So my question would be, Mr. Chair, is there a time duration attached to that, or is that forever infinitum?
Dave?
We don't have one at this stage, but we're open to discussing that. I mean, Frank raised a good point. We are only making a recommendation, Doug, to the director, and we would leave it to the director to really talk with you about what that duration would be. Again, our interest is really saving some groundwater for the investment of 250,000. So I think whatever you can work out with the director on the time frame of that would be acceptable to us.
Yeah,
one or more years.
Yeah, 1 or more years. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we would be willing for full funding to look at, a 10 to 15% cut to the aquifer for 5 or 8 years duration. I think that's well within reasonableness.
Okay, that's good. I think that's kind of what we're talking about here.
For the additional $250,000, the discussion would be to provide an additional 5 to 10, an additional 10% cut to the aquifer. Is that what you're saying, Doug?
Yes.
Okay, so a total would be 15%, the 5 required under statute plus 10% for a period of 5 to 8 years on the remaining 250,000 addition to the project.
I want to clarify that, Steve. I mean, our recommendation is 250,000 total, and then it would be an additional 10% for 5 to 8 years, whatever that quantity is.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And that's on top of the mandatory GSF 5%.
Yes. Well,
We'll see what the director and Doug come up with.
yeah, I think they can figure that out.
Yeah.
I think only they have the power to figure that out.
Does that sound reasonable, Doug?
So the full 500,000, we're still talking only the 250.
We're talking now, the $500,000 would be given to you in exchange for the 5% normal cut to the aquifer, plus for our participation, an additional 10% cut to the aquifer for the money consideration.
Okay, so the full original request for the additional cut to the aquifer.
Well, Steve, we are, Mr. Chairman, we are recommending 250,000 rather than the 500,000. If we go to 500,000, Mr. Chairman, we're not going to be able to fund some of these other projects. So I want to clarify that among the rest of the committee here.
Yes, and I'm saying that we're trying to get a sense from the applicant as to their willingness to provide us 10% additional cut to the aquifer for 5 to 8 years.
Or an additional 250.
For that additional 250.
Well, I was trying to get that for the original 250.
You want 15% for the original 250?
Yes, for 5 to 8 years. Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I remember right from my days in recharge, that 5% cut is only for CAP water. Reclaimed does not have that type of cut to the aquifer. So by agreeing to a 10% cut, we're already leaping over what is normally required under the existing statutes.
Yes. And we are saying the grant money has a value, and if you want more than 250,000, we're trying to establish what the cut to the aquifer should be for that additional 250.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the GUAC understood that normally for reclaim recharge there is zero cut to the aquifer.
Okay, Dave, do we need to modify the comment section to reflect that then?
That's fine. This makes it even more important that we get a cut to the aquifer for our investment, because right now there would be zero. So again, my recommendation is the 250,000 for a 10% cut to the aquifer for 8 years.
Okay.
That's my recommendation.
And is that
I can live with that, Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Roberts, is that on the original 250 or the additional 250?
That's on the original 250, and leave it at that.
So was the cut to the aquifer envisioned at the time you were talking about the applicant's request?
Well, I had inadvertently thought that there was already a 5%, but Doug raised the point that it doesn't apply to effluent, which is good.
Okay.
I think Doug agrees to 10% for an 8-year period for $250,000.
And that's on top of the 250 that is currently being considered.
No, that would not be. That would be the original 250.
So tell me, you have $500,000 in your pocket, you split it into two parts. Is there any cut to the aquifer for the first $250,000.
Well, what I'm saying is that what I'm proposing is that we look at the quantity of money that is in column E, which is $250,000, that's what we're willing to grant EPCOR. And for that, we get a 10% cut to the aquifer for 8 years.
And there's no consideration for cut to the aquifer on the initial portion that's in column C.
Correct. Because I think we're going to be recommending column E.
So what is the total amount that the applicant can conceivably receive at the end of the day?
$250,000.
I support what Dave is saying. I think that's a full resolution, but I think we're also pointing out the difficulty of getting into negotiations on these kind of things in the midst of a committee process.
Yeah, the tricky part about this is that since there is no cut to the aquifer, we'd be providing EPCOR some money without really saving any groundwater, because they're going to earn credits that they can pump in the future. And so the point is to try to gain some savings of groundwater through this investment of these grant dollars. And I think Doug is willing to do that.
So Doug is willing to settle for a $250,000 grant award with a stipulation that he has to provide a cut to the aquifer to the tune of 10%.
For an 8-year period, yes.
For an 8-year period. You okay with that, Doug, conceptually?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, so we're still looking at column E only for purposes of funding projects. We have a project called El Mirage that is currently sitting partially funded at $85,000. Is that what I remember, Anab?
Correct. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall we had a conversation with El Mirage about the feasibility of that.
No.
Or did we? I wonder if
did
it's
not.
worth to bring in Derek in to see if they would be able to accomplish the same or have the same impact with the reduced amount.
Oh, okay, so based upon the funds available at the moment, the $100,000 amount needs to be modified to $85,000 so that it reflects cash on hand. Correct?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ron. I
Yes.
would think the logical thing would be to just leave that open-ended at the bottom for the director then. I mean, he knows how many dollars he has left, and here's our recommendation for the projects extending on down. And so here's 3 more that were not funded. You can take your pick.
Well, I don't disagree. The difficulty I had was in looking at this straight up, and Derek is available in a moment here. Was it suggested that there was $100,000 in that, no matter what the color, and therefore we should only be recommending what cash we do have available, subject to recognizing all or assuming all the other projects above have been fully funded. There would only be $85,000 available for the El Mirage project. Unless you want to move some money from up above down to move him up to 100,000. We got 2 questions, you, Derek. One is, what kind of programming and activities can you accomplish with an $85,000 program?
I'm here. So our program has 4 components. We have a xeriscape, the meter technology, the outreach and education and the water smart. We could get rid of the education. We had some outreach for water smart and some outreach for the turf program. That would eliminate 5,000. If we kept our outreach and education, that was 20,000. Keep that intact. We can pull some of that from there. So there's 5,000 there. We can cut down a year from our Zeroscape program, 10,000. So there's 15,000 savings there. And then I don't know if we could reduce our meter technology. We're looking at purchase 100 meters as kind of like a test. We could probably go down to probably 25 meters as a test on it. Okay. So that would save us there. Let's see, 8, 25. That's about 40,000 there.
Okay, Derek. So there was additional suggestions to put in your basket for consideration. One was that you work with the WET project, which is the number one listed above, and see if you can, as you did a year ago apparently, be able to work with them so your money basically comes from them, but you get the services rendered by them and coming out of your own pocket. That's one possibility. Another possibility was, can you raise the text over on this screen there?
Yes, I can read it.
That basically you go after a water smart project outside of these programming to fund one of your water smart types of activities.
Yeah, we could do that. So we could go out for a water smart. That'd come about 42,000 right there.
Okay. So can we make you whole at $85,000 of our money plus these other sources and other program activities?
Yeah, I think if we cut the water smart out of there and we'll cut some from Zeroscape, I think we could have a pretty robust program for 85,000.
So if the council's receptive, we'll take the $100,000 and we'll modify that to $85,000. And the applicant is willing to pursue water smart funding and a collaborative effort with the WET project, Project WET. Is that a fair summary, Derek?
I believe that's fair, yes.
So again, these are all recommendations from this body to the department director, so he has final say, but we wanted to give him some preliminary thoughts that he can use as he makes his decisions. Okay?
Sounds good.
Staff, do you need any clarification on the information to put in the comment column now?
No, I think we have it all squared here.
Okay, thank you, Derek, for your time and input. I'm back to the group, back to our council discussions. As we see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projects without department grant monies. Is there any thought, conversation needed to consider any adjustments further before we move and second a recommendation to the director?
I'm fine the way it is.
I am too, Mr. Chairman.
Ditto
Okay.
for me. Okay.
Ron?
Shall I make the motion, Mr. Chairman, that we make this recommendation as outlined for the director?
In the column,
Mine's not numbered. The long column.
The long column, which is the amount, entitled amounts recommended and shaded in green.
It appears to have a total of 1,244,126.
I would second that motion.
Okay. Does staff have the motion?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Chair? What did you ask?
I'm asking, do you have the motion?
Oh, yes, definitely. We got the motion.
Okay. And is there anything else that pertains specifically to these grants that we need to talk about before we act on the motion?
Not that I can think of. As you all know, we'll take this list to the director and he would make the final call, taking into consideration your recommendation. He always very much appreciating your thoughts and recommendations. Obviously, there may be some tweaks that would need to be made according to some of his thoughts and prioritization, but that's what we really wanted you to achieve today, and I think it's a great list.
Council members, any final thoughts on these items on this page?
I'm ready.
Comments on the motion. Okay. I just received a question from Mr. Wilson. Is the ranking in column C correct? Meaning if the stipulations cannot be negotiated, how does that change the priority? Very thoughtful question and a good question. Do you have an answer to that, Einav?
Well, I think we'll have to work with the applicants and see. I would suspect at least some of them would be willing to accommodate the recommendation funding as they mentioned today. Again, we'll have to present it to the director and see his thoughts. I would mention that if we were to go solely with column C, you may see that the amount listed under the first 5 projects does not sum to 1,245,000. I believe. Do you remember how much we have the extra there?
45,000.
So we have about 45,000 remaining, but the next project up is not viable for that amount of money. So we just haven't even marked that. But none of the projects below would be in the sum of 45,000. So we'll have to consider what would be done with that amount and perhaps reach out to the candidates and see if there is anything else that can be done. But yeah, I don't have a clear idea of how that would go at that point.
Mr. Wilson, does this fully answer your question?
I mean, I guess so. I was the director and having to go through and negotiate this. If one of the candidates falls out due to logistical or legal or budgetary constraints, I'd want to know, does that candidate then fall from, say, 3 to 5, or do they fall off the list completely at the full budgeted amount or the full requested amount? How does that work?
Traditionally, if a project cannot complete the contractual cycle and sign the document, then we would go to the next available project. So the one that was not able to be funded then slips to the bottom of the list, leaving it open for us to allocate the monies to the list in the order as shown.
We always need We always need to remember that this is at the director's discretion.
Yes.
So no matter what we recommend, he is actually going to approve the grants, and he's going to have staff offer each grantee an amount. If somebody turns it down, then he can ask us to review the process, or he could have staff reallocate it. I mean, it's his decision, not ours.
That's correct. Wilson, you okay with that?
Yes, thank you.
All righty. So I believe we have a motion on the table prepared for voting, and it is to recommend column E to the director for funding of the $1.2 million available for conservation funding, 1.244,126.50 cents. And probably no interest because the interest all went to the somebody else in the big sky of the state. So do I have a motion and a second. And that motion was Mr. Rayner and Mr. Fairbanks.
And let me point out here that in our discussion, we did talk about the need for there to be some requirements for reporting. And I presume that's included in the motion.
So staff, we would ask that you add that as part of the comments that every project has a reporting requirement, and it's not just at the end of the year.
Definitely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Frank, for bringing that back up. Anything else that we need to add to this list? Okay, all in favor of the motion to fund these projects at this amount as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we have 4 yeses. Do we have any opposed? Better not. There's only 4 of us. So, okay, motion carries 4-0, and they are. This recommendation will be taken to the department director for his final decisions. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz, for your thank you to the committee and to the department staff. I'd be remiss if I did not mention, and I think we, the council board, the council as members are pleased to have had a great staff effort on this, and hopefully this process will make your next 2 even easier in Pinal and Tucson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate it.
And I think Dave, I think a couple of our council members might be willing to go down there and provide tutelage, but not at the moment.
For a fee, we could do that.
For a fee, there you go. So
the last thing the other AMAs want is any wisdom from us.
And at this point, it's my responsibility to have a call to the public. Is there any public comment that needs to be made? Or wants to be made, I should say? Any further comments from staff?
No further comments, Mr. Chair.
And final call to the council?
Nope.
Hearing none. Let's say, Mr. Davis, is there a timeline for what? Oh, for the director's decisions? Einav, can you give us a sense of the schedule?
Yes, I'll be happy to. So this is the first GUAC grant meeting that we held. We have the 4 other AMA GUAC meetings to take place. Hopefully we'll be done with that round of GUAC meetings by beginning to mid-July, after which we would bring all of the list to the director to make the final recommendation. So we hope to have a decision from the director by the end of July, if everything will go as smooth as we would hope it would go.
Mr. Schwartz, is that satisfactory?
Sure.
Sorry, I don't know if that was directed at me.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was Mr. Davis. Thank you. At this time, seeing no other matters to be brought before us, unless there's an objection, I will adjourn this meeting. Hearing none, seeing none, at 3:45, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.